Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vicky Olmington. I'm a Business Relationship Manager at the University of Reading, and I support health research and translation. I'm hosting the event today on behalf of Thames Valley AI Hub in partnership with Bayer LifeHub UK, and it's really great to see so many of you attending today's event. This is the first in a new series of events in our collaboration with Bayer LifeHub UK. This series is in response to the feedback we've had from an event back in January 2021, it feels so long ago now, but we were focused at that event on unravelling the challenges for AI in healthcare. Now, we are going to kick off first of all with a bit of an introduction from Katharina and Lynn from Bayer LifeHub UK. Can I start off with Lynn?
Yes, thank you, Vicky, and welcome from my side as well. So I'm Lynn Collins, I'm the UK head of LifeHub for Bayer, and it's really nice to see so many people here on the call. I always look forward to these opportunities to meet with external people interested in the same field as we are in Bayer LifeHub and also Thames Valley AI Hub. So it's really great to have so many people on our event this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Ellie, who will be our presenter today. So thank you, Ellie. Katharina?
Thank you, Lynn, and I couldn't agree more what you said. Good to see you all on the call. I'm Katharina Urban, the R&D representative from the LifeHub UK, and very excited to learn more today. Vicky, back to you.
So thank you very much, guys. So before we start, I'm going to just take care of a little bit of housekeeping for us today, and then explain a little bit of how the event is going to run. Now, we very much encourage you to use the chat function for general discussion and any questions that you might have throughout the event. I'm going to keep an eye on questions, and you're welcome to leave your cameras on throughout the event, but please can you make sure that your microphones are on mute throughout. I want to let you know that we're recording the event today, and it has already begun recording. This recording will be posted on the TVAI Hub website and will be posted on the library tab on the website after the event. Please note that this will not show the chat function, so do feel free to chat openly about the event today. It won't be posted on the website afterwards, and you can find all of the recordings of most of our previous events rather on the website as well. Now, to wrap up for the procedural part of the event, I just want to flag that shortly after the event today, we're going to circulate an email with the slides and a short questionnaire about the webinar as well. The feedback that you submit will be anonymous, but it really helps us to improve not only our events that we run, but also the overall content of the Hub and making sure that it's appropriate for our community. The Hub is really for the community. We run it for you. And for our participants, so it's really important for us to understand what you think. We will be aiming to finish today, of course, at 2 p.m. sharp, as we have shared already. And we are really excited that we are hearing from Eleonora Harwich, who is the Head of Collaborations at NHS AI Lab. Ellie's work focuses on communicating and engaging with health and care professionals, the public and industry, to support and share the work of the NHS AI Lab and the potential of AI. Prior to joining NHSX, she was the Director of Research at the Reform think tank, where she co-authored papers on AI in the NHS, the value of healthcare data, commercial models in healthcare, and the regulation of data-driven technologies. She's a member of the British Standard Institutions Committee on Artificial Intelligence. Eleonora's talk is entitled Getting Data Right for AI. So, without further ado, let's hear it from Ellie. Thanks very much, Ellie.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you all for being here today. And hopefully you will be able to kind of learn a few things about what it is that the AI Lab does. So if you just give me 1 second, I will share my slides with you. Fantastic. You should be able to see them now on screen without viewing my speaker notes. All good? Great, amazing. So the plan for today was really to talk to you a little bit about what the NHS AI Lab is and what it is that we do. And then to really delve into the question of what the data requirements are for AI and talk about some of the challenges around this. And then also highlight what the lab is doing to be able to address some of these challenges. And then I'll end on my favorite topic, which is regulation. So hopefully that will give you a kind of whistle-stop tour and high level, I think, kind of points to be able to answer this question. So about the AI Lab and what we do. So the AI Lab sits within NHSX, which is actually a joint unit between NHS England and Improvement and the Department of Health. And what we are here to do is really help with the digitization of health and care services, being able to connect the health and care system through technology, and hopefully through these goals, be able to transform the way that patient care is delivered both at home and within hospitals. So we are a unit that sits between those two, and actually within NHSX, there's a whole host of different teams aside from the NHS AI Lab. As you can see here on your screen, we have an innovation team, a tech policy team, a data policy team, which is obviously very important for some of the topics that we will be talking about today. And we actually work in very close relationship with them, because obviously they handle a lot of the kind of requirements that we need to be able to do our work. But this is just to give you an idea that, you know, ultimately the AI Lab does have a role to play, obviously, within the kind of data policy space, but ultimately that kind of policy agenda is held by another team within NHSX. So work in close collaboration, but held by another team. And so we have a kind of set of goals, obviously, that we have within the organization. So the kind of first goal that we have as the AI Lab is really to demonstrate the potential of AI-driven technologies for health and care, and be able to build an understanding both amongst patients and health and care professionals and the broader public about how AI can be used, and actually how transformational it can be to the front line, and ultimately how it can go about, you know, improving access to care, the speed of diagnosis, the accuracy of diagnosis, and also help alleviate, you know, some of the frontline pressures. So say, be it trying to for example, optimize the scheduling of operating theaters, or the staff rosters, or all of those different applications that can make a meaningful and tangible difference to the front line and help alleviate some of the pressures that the NHS is currently facing. And so hopefully, through being able to demonstrate the utility of being able to use that technology and helping people identify where the best use cases for that technology lie, we can then affect our kind of second goal, which is really to kind of build the trust and confidence around the use of that technology amongst the public and healthcare professionals. And one of the things that I think is kind of important to highlight is, you know, we don't just rely on kind of blind trust from professionals, healthcare professionals and the public. We also seek to be able to gain that trust, to also be able to demonstrate what we know as trustworthiness. So kind of, you know, having all of these principles around kind of transparency, explainability of what it is that we do in order to be able to affect and be able to kind of gain and maintain that trust. But obviously none of that would happen if we didn't have the, you know, kind of nucleus or absolute backbone of all of this, which is regulation. And so the AI Lab kind of sees its role in trying to advance and kind of influence the conversation around the regulation of this technology, to really make sure that AI in health is actually safe, effective, but kind of going beyond also the kind of regulatory requirements, and really looking at the kind of ethical questions around, you know, kind of equal distribution of this technology, or equal opportunity to be able to have access to it. So in order to deliver on these goals, we have obviously a structure to the lab. And so we have 5 main delivery programs, which I will say a little bit about at a kind of high level now, and then delve into what some of the programs specifically do as they are relevant to give kind of answers to the question of the data requirements for AI. So we have, and I'll start in kind of reverse order, a very big grant fund that is called the AI in Health and Care Award, which is a grant fund of £140 million that will be allocated over 4 years. We have already allocated the money for round 1 and 2 and are now in the process of selecting the round 3 winners. And the idea of this fund is really to be able to support the most promising technologies that would help the NHS deliver on the long-term plan goals. And obviously, given the pandemic, we have added obviously the kind of requirement of also potentially trying to address some of the current issues that the NHS is facing in terms of post-pandemic recovery. In addition to that, we also have a national imaging program, which basically, and that I will kind of tell you a little bit more about in a few slides, which is the kind of main infrastructure building project that we have, which basically we kind of through the pandemic decided that one of the ways in which we could have a positive impact on the COVID response and one of the interesting ways in which AI could be applied was actually through the application of AI to chest images. So be it kind of MRIs, CT scans or X-rays. And we kind of decided to create a national level data set in order to be able to advance research on COVID. And so this was mostly to look at, if we could potentially develop models that would help prevent severe COVID cases. And this served as a baseline in order to be able to try and develop a wider program around medical imaging and develop a national medical imaging platform that would, kind of be a collection of more images than just chest images that could include images of the brain or mammography scans and so on, in order to be able to safely train, validate, and also robustness test models that are currently on the market. We then also have our Skunkworks team. So the Skunkworks team looks at trying to help NHS organizations develop proof of concepts around AI. So say you're an organization within the kind of very big family of NHS organizations, and you're facing a specific issue where you have quite a lot of information or data about, and you don't really know what it is that you could potentially do with that information, but you know that from that information you could potentially kind of change your working practices or try and affect a problem. So I'll give you a specific example. We worked in collaboration with NHS Resolutions to try and understand if we could potentially use machine learning models to be able to detect and predict much earlier where negligence claims would be able to come from, so that then hospital trusts could then take on board that information and try and avoid a negligence claim, full stop. And so we basically help different types of organizations, either at a national level or at a local level, be able to, I guess, have the kind of in-house capabilities, or help them kind of develop those capabilities in order to be able to understand what it is that they can do with the information that they have to be able to deliver better services or deliver on the goals of their organization. And so we have a kind of a Dragon's Den model where people come and pitch their problems. We select a few problems and then kind of do a deep dive to help them try and address that problem, or to understand, if AI is really the appropriate solution for this, which I think is really interesting when you think about the broader government agenda around enabling the public sector to make that informed decision about, is it best to potentially do it in-house, or do we have the capabilities to do it in-house, or is it better to buy, but also be able to smartly buy a solution if that's the kind of decision that is being made. And then last but not least, we have our two kind of programs that I think are quite tightly linked together, which is the AI Ethics Initiative and regulation kind of program that we have. And so there we're dealing with quite a lot of different questions. So in the kind of regulation side of things, we're trying to really optimize the regulatory pathway so that we avoid as many frictions as possible for innovators. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those frictions and why those frictions arise in my last slide. But in terms of the AI ethics initiative, we're doing actually quite a lot of interesting projects, for example, looking at how AI could potentially be used as a force for good and as a way to actually mitigate the risk of propagating health and care inequalities for specific subgroups. And so here we're talking about BME populations that might, or that research has basically shown that AI could potentially adversely affect these patient groups. And so we're trying to understand if the reverse could actually be done and could be used as an equalizing effect. And so this is a kind of big research call that we've done in collaboration with the Health Foundation to help fund research into this specific question, and then eventually be able to develop policy frameworks off the back of that. That's kind of a whistle-stop tour of how the team is organized. And then obviously we have my team's kind of collaboration and engagement, helping all of these delivery programs be able to do all of the stakeholder engagement and kind of be able to strike the partnerships with the right stakeholders that would, really make these projects successful, because obviously, none of this can be done without a community and good partnerships. And then we obviously have a policy and strategy team, and like any public sector program, we have a program management office that makes sure that we keep to the deadlines and within our means. So I'll talk a little bit more about what the AI Award does and kind of give you a little bit more numbers and context to the AI Awards. I think it's interesting to kind of highlight that, a few years ago, I think the kind of concept of doing AI in health and care was still something that was quite theoretical, or still, very much in the realm of research, and didn't necessarily really have that much kind of grounding in reality. And I'm not going to stand here to say that every trust is using it, but there are more use cases being developed. And so the progress to date is that through round 1 and 2, we have awarded funds to 80 projects in total, ranging from, kind of algorithms that might help you triage patients on waiting lists, all the way through to algorithms in the field of image recognition, helping to identify early signs of stroke, and then being able to help doctors understand where patients should be sent within a stroke network. And so we have over 60 hospitals across the UK as test sites at the moment, and this means that it's impacting about 60,000 patients currently, which, given where we were only a few years ago, it is quite a big advance. And obviously all of these technologies, as I had already mentioned, are kind of helping achieve the goals set out in the long-term plan. And like I said, a lot of the technologies that are going to be coming through the round 3 are also going to be helping with the pandemic recovery, in addition to that. But obviously no AI happens if you don't have data, right? So now we're going to kind of address a little bit of the questions around data requirements and what they are. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the AI Lab is trying to affect some of these, but obviously some of the kind of policy or technical levers around this lie with other sides of the organization. So in terms of the data requirements for AI, I think number 1, really, it's very dependent on the problem at hand, because obviously the kind of type of needs or data requirements that you might have for, say, a kind of classification algorithm that is trying to kind of detect if someone has cancer or not breast cancer would be very different to those where you're trying to, say, optimize the scheduling of operating theaters. So, firstly, it really depends on what you're trying to do. And then in theory, from a technical perspective, obviously you need machine readable data, which sounds like an obvious thing to say, but actually when you look at the levels of digitization within the NHS, it's not that obvious, or not always that easily accessible to be able to have machine readable data. The second thing is that if you have machine readable data, you need to be able to extract that data from IT systems, which again is not always the easiest thing to do, given the kind of notorious interoperability challenges that there are in the NHS and the difficulties that exist at times to be able to extract that data. You also want that data to be standardized, which again seems like an obvious thing to say, but the kind of whole conversation around data standards in the NHS, has taken quite a long time to kind of move along. But I think quite a lot of progress has been made on that side of things, especially with the advances in making sure that we all agree what type of clinical codes we should be using, and kind of moving slowly towards that. And then obviously data needs to be of good quality, which again can be very variable and at times for completely, I guess, understandable reasons, in the sense that data in health and care is primarily collected for direct patient care. It's not really collected for secondary uses, and secondary uses being obviously research, planning, and all of those exciting things where you get to do AI. And so because of that difference in nature, it means that the data quality isn't always what you would want it to be for a specific research project, because that's not the purpose for which it was collected. So I think there is always going to be an inherent tension in that, but ultimately in theory, that's what you would want. And in addition to that, depending on what school of thought you are in the field of AI, you need somewhat of a sizable sample. There is, still some divisions within the world of AI where some people, some models are data hungry, and that's true, but there is still a kind of movement within the field of AI where actually, you could develop models that are less data hungry. And then obviously in theory, from a legal perspective, you need to be able to do several things from a legal and kind of general governance perspective around data. So, firstly, you need to be able to understand the provenance of that data, how it was collected, the context in which it was collected. And then you have a whole host of things that you need to do around the legalities of data protection. And so you need to be able to understand and interpret data protection in the light of the question or problem that you're looking to solve or understand, because that will basically be able to dictate what level of anonymization you need, or if anonymization of data isn't practical at all for the specific purposes of your research project or product development. And also the type of data that you would need to access, if it's protected characteristics or not, will also dictate what you are able to do to it. So in theory, you kind of need to have all of these things solved. This can be quite challenging, of course, because, I guess I kind of went through some of the kind of technical challenges that you might face, but in terms of the legal challenges that you might face, or the kind of governance challenges, is that there's actually, quite a lot of different interpretations, let's say, of what data protection says or allows you to do. Also in healthcare, compared to other fields or other areas of the public sector, there's an added complication to the legalities of data, which is that, it's not only the GDPR, not only data protection, but we also have common law, which does create a little bit of tensions into how do we interpret all of the bits of legislation, which can at times create some confusion. But I think also in general, there is quite a wide range of interpretations of what data protection actually allows you to do. So in terms of how we're trying to affect the building of infrastructure, so I'll tell you a little bit more of a longer story about the national COVID chest imaging data set. So basically, in kind of early 2020, no surprise to anyone, pandemic hit. And we knew very little about the virus and how to prevent it at the time, or how to try and prevent severe COVID infections. And so that's where we really saw an opportunity to be able to contribute to the COVID effort. And so that's why we went about, and that was really the kind of rationale behind creating a national COVID chest imaging database. So, what's in the NCCID? It's a whole collection of X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, taken by patients when they were at hospital with other relevant clinical information. So for example, positive COVID test or negative COVID test, to be able to, understand exactly if they had COVID or not and be able to train and label the data appropriately. So currently 26, and actually I think it's 27 now, and I should have updated that, hospital trusts have donated data to the NCCID, which is basically over 55,000 images of about slightly more than 18,000 patients in total. And so to maybe answer some of the questions around data safeguarding, which might be a kind of obvious thing, but obviously everyone involved within the NCCID abides with very strict laws around data. Data access is managed by the NHS AI Lab, and we have a committee with some lay members that are part of it, and obviously information governance specialists. Data can only be accessed for the purposes of COVID research. Access to that information is time limited. And data within the national COVID chest imaging data set has been pseudonymized, which is slightly different than anonymized. Very happy to pick up that question in the Q&A later. But so the plan for the future really is that we want to try and go bigger and kind of, think bigger for the future of the NHS and also the potential of AI in healthcare. And so really the idea here is, following the successes from the COVID chest imaging database, we are preparing plans to develop a national AI medical imaging platform, which would provide a much larger volume of different types of medical data, imaging data at a national level, which means that both developers and innovators in the private sector, but also in academia, would be able to access good quality data that would be nationally representative, and that data could be made available for both training, validation purposes, but also potentially exploring how it could be used as a mechanism to test products that are already on the market. So say, for example, if a product that's already on the market, has done its training validation, has gone through the UK CA marking certification, but there might still be questions about how well it would perform outside of the context in which it was trained and validated. We would be able to provide a national database that would be able to answer that question ultimately, and hopefully through that be able to mitigate even further any concerns around bias in AI. So that's for the National Medical Imaging Platform. And now we get on to my favorite topic, regulation. I promise I'll keep it brief because I know it's very dry for most people. But the kind of two things that we're trying to do really within the field of regulation, I know this is very high level points, and obviously we have more kind of specific portfolios than just saying myth busting and need to clarify things. But I just thought I'd keep it simple for this. But basically there is quite a lot of, I guess, misinformation or misunderstanding about regulation in this space, because it is quite a complex field and there are actually quite a lot of regulators involved in this. There is a very big education and training piece and communication piece that needs to be done around regulation of AI as a medical device. And so that is, ranges from anything from, say, for example, a project that we're doing in collaboration with Health Education England to try and understand what are the factors that affect the health and care workforce's confidence in order to be able to kind of use these devices, and kind of what's the base knowledge and how that could potentially be integrated into the skills and capabilities framework that Health Education England is thinking about reassessing. So touching on kind of workforce questions all the way through to, what is it that we could do here and now in terms of, say, publishing short blogs or more digestible content that could be, 10 things that you need to know about regulation, and kind of posting those online, or at least kind of being able to disseminate more digestible and easily accessible information about regulation. And then in terms of the need to clarify things, I'll explain a little bit why things need to be clarified and why things can seem a bit complicated. So if you just look at the regulators that either directly regulate AI-driven technologies in the UK, or that have a loose kind of role to play in this, is all of these organizations. So you'd have the ICO that obviously puts out guidance about data in general, and is the main regulator of data in the UK. A lot of that guidance is then interpreted and taken into account by the Health Research Authority, which is the main regulator of medical information and research in the UK. The HRA, Health Research Authority, plays a really big role in approvals to access data for research and research in regulation, be it done by the private sector or academia, it's regarded exactly as the same, which I know in public perception might be a little bit different because people generally tend to associate research with pretty much just academia, but that's absolutely not the case. And in terms of the regulation, it's exactly the same. And then if your product, if your AI is classified as a medical device, you will then need to interact with the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency to go through their whole kind of compliance and conformity assessment process. And then obviously eventually you will potentially interact with the Care Quality Commission, although mostly I really hope that it doesn't happen, because the Care Quality Commission basically assesses the quality of service and could potentially indirectly detect an issue with an AI device if, say, it affected the quality of services. I put the General Medical Council there because obviously it does have a stake as well in terms of the information dissemination for doctors on this topic, and also because they have a really interesting tool to be able to navigate information governance and data sharing. So when is it appropriate to share information about patients and when it isn't? And actually it's a really good navigator. I highly recommend if you ever have questions around that. It's a pretty simple decision tree, and they have a really nice tool around it. But that's not all, because actually you have a whole host of other bodies that you will need to interact with, particularly if your product is classified as a medical device. And so the logos that you see below, it's not a complete list, by the way. I've just kind of randomly selected these, but they are what you call notified bodies, and they're actually the people who carry out the conformity assessments on behalf of the MHRA. So you both need to interact with the notified bodies and the MHRA. But then also NICE is very important. I mean, they're not a regulator, but if you want to get commissioned within the NHS, you do need to do their health technology assessments, because if not, you can't really get I mean, it's very good to be able to get on the commissioning frameworks to be able to do this, or at least it generally increases the trustworthiness in the eyes of commissioners if you are have done a health technology assessment. Obviously, they have a kind of role to play in this. But then you have a whole host of other players that you might want to stakeholders that you might want to interact with as well, or that you will interact with. So say, for example, the National Institute for Health Research could kind of help you carry out clinical trials, if that's the kind of route that you decide, the route to evidence that you decide to take on. The National Data Guardian obviously puts out very useful guidance around managing and safeguarding patient data. Then you have a whole host of other bodies that you might want to interact with. HDR UK are doing quite a lot of work in the field of information governance, trying to harmonize the different interpretations that various NHS local NHS organizations might have around information governance to try and simplify all of this. Then you might want to interact with the AI Lab as well to be able to get funding to do your AI project. You obviously can go to your HSN networks. You have a whole host of different organizations, and that's why I really insist on the ... in this picture, is that it's quite a complex one. And so to be able to simplify things, one of the big pieces of the regulations portfolio that we have within NHSX is that we are funding regulators and NICE to be able to bring all of this information together, because obviously right now for an innovator, when they're trying to figure out what it is that they need to do at different stages of the product development process, they will have to go to loads of different websites. They will have to be able to firstly navigate those websites, understand where's the most updated guidance, what do I need to follow, what do I need to do, which actually being able to merge and understand all of that information is really very, very difficult. And you know, when you are not always very au fait with this world of regulation, actually you might, you know, think that this is the most updated guidance, and then a few weeks later you might be like, oh, I didn't see this link, and then there's this other updated guidance, which actually, you know, can cause delays and can be a bit difficult for people to navigate. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to support the creation of what is known as, for now, the multi-agency advisory service, which would be a basically single portal or website where people could find all of the most updated guidance and information from all of these regulators, organized in a way where people would understand what it is that they need to do and when, so that we be able to make the kind of compliance with regulation slightly smoother than what it is currently. So that's, in a nutshell, all that we're doing in the AI Lab. But as I mentioned at the beginning, having a kind of community of people around AI is really important. We also have our virtual hub, which is hosted on the NHS Collaboration's Future platform, where we have you know, communities of interest and practice around the different delivery programs that we have. But that's also a good way to be able to interact with us. For example, the first draft of the National Strategy for AI in Health and Care was published on the hub for comments from members. It's very easy to sign up and open to anyone. Obviously, if you want to find out more information about the different delivery programs, which I only managed to do a very short whistle-stop tour of, you have our websites. We're on LinkedIn, on Twitter, so please join the conversation there. Stop sharing the screen.
Thank you very much, Ellie. That was really fantastic. As you say, a whistle-stop tour of what is a hugely complicated picture, with particularly so many different bodies involved. And like, I hadn't quite comprehended that myself, so it was really good to understand some of the challenges. Yeah. Now we've had a few questions throughout the session, which is fantastic. I'm going to start off with a couple that potentially slightly easier ones to answer, I hope, for you.
Okay, let's go.
That are just a little bit more referring people to places. So Linda has asked about the funded algorithms that you mentioned right up at closer to the beginning. Would it be possible to direct her to a list of those? Would there...
Oh, of course. Well, if you give, you can ask me the second question. I will post the link on the chat.
Lovely. Well, the next one is also going to be another link, and it would be Philippa was asking for a link to the decision tool that you mentioned.
Oh, yes, of course.
So those
so let me just,
conscious they might just take you a little minute to grab.
That's fine. So here are all of the AI award funded projects. Where's the chat? So this is AI award.
And just while you're doing that, just to reassure everyone, there's been quite a few questions also come in to say, will the slides be shared? We normally share the slides after the event. You'll receive an email from us with a questionnaire, and your feedback would be really helpful. We'll give you the slides on that, and also we'll be making sure that we share the recording of today's event as well, which will be available on our website shortly afterwards too.
Yes, so the other link, I think that might be a little bit more difficult for me to find right away.
Oh, I think that Roberto may have posted it for you already, the GMC website.
Roberto.
Oh,
lovely.
thank you very much, Roberto.
Lovely to see you. Yes, thank you.
It's always good to have a friend on hand to help.
Yeah.
Now, okay, a couple of other questions that have come in. So Soma has asked a question around whether or not the NHS have any human movement and or cardiovascular databases that can be used for product development within the private sector. I think that comes to a broader question actually about access for the private sector to some of this data, really.
Yes, so sorry, does NHS have any human movement or cardiovascular database? That's a very good question. In all honesty, I actually don't know. I know for sure that NHSX wouldn't, because we are not data controllers. Maybe I'll do a bit of research on that one and maybe come back to Soma, because off the top of my head, I don't know.
That is no problem at all. Soma and I are already in touch over another project. So Soma, just do drop me a line if you've not heard from me. Yeah. Now, the question I had, Ellie, was round about, you talked about the barriers and the challenges in the data, but what about the barriers to the trusts engaging with AI? You said that not all trusts are engaging at the moment. So what is stopping them? And is there, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think there's one limitation which the AI lab can't really affect, and the AI lab can't really affect, which is obviously the kind of level of digital maturity of a trust, which is obviously a kind of ongoing conversation within the NHS, and there are kind of loads of different programs seeking to try and affect that and help trusts increase their level of digital maturity. But ultimately, to be able to do AI, you do, as I said, the kind of very basic thing that you still do need machine readable data. And so obviously when you're kind of dealing with institutions that might be mostly paper-based, that already means that we definitely can't necessarily interact with them for now. And they need to be able to be supported through a digitization journey. In terms of those who would potentially be digitally mature enough, but not necessarily interacting with us now, I mean, to be quite honest, there's a lot of things going on in the NHS in terms of frontline pressures and what people are thinking about currently, right? So it's normal that, if you don't necessarily have the kind of digital savviness or understanding of the technology within your trust, you might not necessarily see how this might be useful to you. And that really ultimately is the role of the lab, is to be able to demonstrate what that tangible impact can be able to demonstrate, how beneficial it can be, not only in terms of the NHS's long-term plans, but also current issues that the NHS is facing. So be it, how could AI potentially be used to help deal with the wait lists that certain trusts are facing, all the way through to, how it could speed up the diagnostics or help with, kind of elective recovery, diagnostic backlog, also how it could potentially help to move care outside of the acute sector into the home by, say, for example, kind of using the thing that we all have here in our pockets, which obviously the cameras of these phones can be used in relation with say other apps. So for example, to give a kind of tangible example to this, one of the companies that we've supported through the AI award actually is using people's kind of phones that they have at home. People get sent a kind of testing kit. They kind of dip it's kind of a urine test. So they dip the little stick into the sample of urine, and then just take a picture with their phone, and that can help and basically kind of immediately have a kind of result appear, and that could basically help with the detection of acute kidney injury. So it's kind of things like that I think would be able to kind of ultimately demonstrate the potential and hopefully engage more people within this conversation. So
it sounds like there's absolutely huge potential with this. It's really, really, really interesting. We've had quite a few more questions actually come in the last few minutes. Marcus is saying that the NMIP sounds like a really fantastic project and is curious about what the timeline is for it. How long's a piece of string, or is it a bit more?
Yeah, oh God, it's civil service response / politician's response. How long is a piece of string? Exactly. I think I'll go for that. Basically, it's impending. We're kind of currently actually designing some of the engagement activities that we will be doing around. We're having discussions about, say, how far do we go about kind of co-designing the governance? Would we be able to have, kind of some of the technical requirements co-designed with patients and the public, kind of having all of those discussions of what is going to be the plan, what's going to be the commissioning framework that we're going to be able to use to be able to commission the National Medical Imaging Platform. I know that they're thinking about the imaging team is thinking about their kind of image acquisition plan. What are we going to start with? All of those things. So yes, basically we're kind of going through all of the weeds and of the detail of how we're going to set this up. And obviously it's going to be a slow progress. It's not going to be, bam, we have a National Medical Imaging Platform with a whole host of images right away, although that would be great. But it's obviously going to take, engagement with trust imaging networks that already currently exist and are trying to kind of simplify access to imaging data, and to be able to collaborate with them and obviously what's already going on within that community to be able to develop that.
There's interest from one of our industrial partners who's gotten in touch, interested, who is developing algorithms around imaging, and they're interested to know whether or not they would be able to access the imaging database. And I guess that's the same for any commercial partner that's interested in accessing any AI, I'm making the assumption here, data. What are the routes through that they can maybe apply to access either the imaging database or any other?
Yeah, so for the NMIP, I'm assuming it's going to be something relatively similar to what we have for the National COVID Chest Imaging Database, which is basically that we're going to have a committee that is going to discuss the applications, and we will be able to grant access for research purposes. I mean, it's going to be like any data access request. You're going to have a kind of data sharing agreement drafted, very clear purpose to the research project, make sure that it's kind of for the public benefit and so on and so forth. So you'll have a kind of whole list of requirements, which is quite similar to what you find now to be able to access any type of information within the health and care space.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and get a couple more questions out to you. So I'm going to say keep these answers short, if you don't mind, just so that we can finish on time. Hugo asked a question around how the NHS handles pseudonymization and anonymizations, which comes back to your own question earlier.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously two completely different beasts, right? So how do we handle that? So I'm not 100% sure of what the question is trying to get at, if it's trying to get at the difference between the two, or if it's how we go about doing it. I know that for the National COVID Chest Imaging database, we decided to go for pseudonymization rather than anonymization of the information, given the nature of most of the research projects that were going to happen off the back of it. So that's the kind of rationale and decision of why it was made, which obviously does mean that granting access to that database is slightly more complex, because it's not considered, because pseudonymized data is still considered as personal data within the eyes of the law, versus anonymized data, which isn't, although there is still a risk to re-identification. So that's kind of short response.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we might make this the last question. There was a question around whether or not you have any examples of AI projects that do not address the clinical workflow, for example, procurement.
That would address issues within the field of procurement.
So just instead of an AI project addressing patient outcomes, is there any AI around the procurement of goods, is what they've suggested?
Not that I've seen, no. I mean, at least not that I know of the AI awardees.
Sure. Okay.
But I must admit, I don't have the list of the exact 80 in my mind.
No, that's not a problem. Not a problem. I'm going to give you one last question, since that was a short one, and this is one that I know very little about, so I'm going to read it to you. Is the NHS AI Labs concerned with only using machine learning? They are stating, Alan is stating that this is usually a black box. Do you support KBS, usually white box, where AI started in medicine? You used to have successful NHS directed self-assessment tools for the public triage, which were kept thousands out of A&E and GP practices. Is this strand of AI still supported? You're nodding and smiling.
No, I am, because the thing is that it's, you know, we adopt a kind of broad definition of AI within the organization, and, you know, don't necessarily need to, you know, do a deep convolutional neural net to solve every single problem. And actually that's one of the things that we think is very important, is to be able to decide what's the most appropriate model given the specific problem. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the most complicated one, even if it looks cool to be able to do those things. It's like, it's not the point. Ultimately, we're trying to kind of see what's the kind of most effective way to be able to deal with that specific problem.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions, everybody. And thank you, Ellie, for answering them so well. If there's no other questions, I'm going to stop the questions to Ellie just now, if that's all right, because we are quite tight on time. Ellie, do you have any other closing remarks or anything else that you'd like to add from today?
I don't think so. Aside from, it's lovely to speaking to you all, and you know, of course, if you have any questions, do feel free to send them through to the AI Lab email address, which I think was posted, and if not, I'll kind of share in the chat now.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today, Ellie. It's been really interesting. Now I'm going to hand back over now to Katharina from Bayer LifeHub UK for them to do a roundup before we conclude today's event. Katharina?
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And maybe make it very short, because I think that was a very exciting session. And on behalf of the LifeHub team, Ali, thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I think very exciting. I learned personally a lot, and I think based on the participations, we can see a lot of questions are still coming in. So we will make sure that we answer your questions, and please, as Vicky said, send us your feedback so we can make sure also that we have a great session next year.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Katharina. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. And it's my job now just to round off the end of today's event. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you all at our next joint event, which is going to take place on the 16th of February. It's going to follow another one of our key themes that we identified back in January 2021, and when we ran our Unravelling the Challenges for AI in Healthcare event. Now, the event itself, you can see from the slides that my colleague has put up just now, that it's going to explore how to work with clinicians and what's the reality. And we've got a couple of fantastic colleagues that are going to come along and talk about some projects that they have run. We have Bazigoza, who is the Associate Director of Informatics at the Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust, and also Vicky Lee, who is the Associate Professor for Informatics and Digital Health at Henley Business School based here at the University of Reading. So they're going to be along to talk to us on that day. There'll be a bit more information about that event, hopefully available before Christmas. It'll be available on our website, and we'll share it on our newsletter. So keep an eye out for that for any updates. Thank you very much again to everyone for coming along today. It's been really nice to see you all here. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.